Bourbon, the bold, smooth, and distinctly American spirit. But beyond its rich taste, bourbon has a fascinating past, packed with secrets most people don't know. Let's take a sip of history. Bourbon's story begins in the late 1700s, when Scottish, Irish, and French settlers in Kentucky needed to preserve their excess corn. Instead of wasting it, they distilled it into whiskey, and over time perfected what we now call bourbon. What made bourbon unique? Storing it in charred oak barrels, which gave it a deep, smoky, vanilla-like flavor. This was an accident at first, but it became a signature process. Many believe bourbon is named after Bourbon County, Kentucky. But some historians think the name actually comes from Bourbon Street in New Orleans, where barrels of Kentucky whiskey were sold. Bourbon survived wars, prohibition, and even a presidential declaration. In 1964, Congress officially named it America's native spirit. But here's where it gets even more interesting. During Prohibition, whiskey was illegal, except for medicinal bourbon. Yep, doctors could prescribe it. Over 6 million prescriptions were written for bourbon as medicine. NASA once sent bourbon-aging experiments to space. Scientists wanted to see how zero gravity affects the aging process. Turns out bourbon matures differently in space. Science meets spirits. By law, bourbon barrels can only be used once, but they aren't wasted. Many end up in Scotland, where they're used to age Scotch whiskey. Even Abraham Lincoln has a bourbon connection. His father, Thomas Lincoln, worked as a distiller before switching to farming. Maybe America's greatest president got his wisdom from a family tied to bourbon. So the next time you sip a glass of bourbon, remember, you're drinking history in every drop. Cheers to America's spirit.